All right, what's going on, everyone? We got a lot to get into, so let's get started. Beginning with Ukrainian President Zelensky for the first time talking about the total number of casualties that his country has so far suffered in this war. He said, quote, 31,000 Ukrainian military personnel have been killed in this war. Not 300,000, not 150,000, not whatever Putin and his deceitful circle have been lying about, but nevertheless, each of these losses is a great sacrifice for us. He said, but I cannot say how many wounded we have because Russia will know how many people we have left on the battlefield. I just cannot say. Now, Zelensky's figures here stand in stark contrast to estimates from U.S. officials in August of 2023, where at that time, an article in the New York Times estimated that the total number of Ukrainian deaths was close to 70,000. Those estimates also had total number of Ukrainian wounded between 100 and 120,000. In looking at the Russian estimates of Ukrainian casualties that Zelensky is referencing in that statement, this past December, Russian Defense Minister Shoigu said that since the beginning of the special military operation in February 2022, Ukraine has lost over 383,000 men, 14,000 tanks and armored vehicles, 8,500 artillery pieces and multiple launch rocket systems, and over 800 airplanes and helicopters. Now, Ukraine, at the start of the war, had around 250 airplanes and helicopters when this invasion first kicked off in February 2022. So I'm going to try to get to the 800 total number here. So 95 fixed wing and 85 rotary wing aircraft have been pledged to Ukraine by Western countries. Not all have quite yet arrived. So we could add another 180 to the original number of 250. Now we're at 430. We can also maybe add in the larger drones like the Bayraktar. That's another 35. So we're at 465 total aircraft under Ukraine's control. And that's kind of stretching it. That's 465 counting drones and the platforms like the F-16s that have not yet arrived in country. So the challenge here is when a claim like that is so far off, it makes it hard to use that number at all. Like if the claim that Russia has destroyed 3x the total number of Ukraine's Air Force, how do you whittle that down to something that you have any level of confidence in? Then earlier this week, the Ukrainian Air Force says that they shot down their second Russian A-50 early warning and control aircraft, also over the Sea of Azov. The first one of these was shot down back on January 14th in the same general location. Now, Russian Telegram channels came out quickly to say that this was a case of friendly fire and that these A-50 AWACS types aircraft or this one, was shot down by Russian air defense systems. It's not just the cost and the technology involved in the A-50, but the crew is a significant loss here as well. You can't just grab random mobilized soldiers, train them for a few weeks or even months, throw them on something like the A-50 and have any chance of success. The crew members on here are very experienced, very well trained, very technically minded to be able to operate this type of equipment. Now, a little more about the A-50. They help to detect incoming Ukrainian missiles. They assist Russia with targeting of Ukrainian assets all across the battlefield and relay communications between forward elements to elements further in the rear all across Russia. Now, prior to that earlier shootdown in January, Russia had 9 of these modernized A-50s. Now, it's down to 7. That's a pretty significant hit to go from 9 to 7 of the AWACS type aircraft that's critical to how most modern militaries wage war. Now, it's not just these A-50s being shot down. Ukraine says that they've shot down 10 Russian aircraft in the past 10 days or so here. In addition to the A-50, Ukraine says that they shot down 7 Su-34s and 2 Su-35s in the last 7 to 10 days. Now, there's no confirmation of this, but the fact that multiple Russian aircraft have been shot down in a very short period of time lends some credibility to the idea that a Patriot system might have been moved forward, much further forward than it had been previously operating. So some of those Russian aircraft were shot down in airspace that they previously thought was secure. Then we also have some pretty notable Ukrainian losses that all came out yesterday. We have videos showing the first Abrams being struck and possibly destroyed in Ukraine, a NASAMS, an air defense system that was targeted, along with an Archer self-propelled artillery system, and then the Ukrainian-made Bodana, also a self-propelled artillery platform. Now, this is notable because a lot of these, it marks the first time that this type of Western equipment has been targeted and or destroyed so far in this war. Now, in terms of the Abrams, it looks like one was possibly destroyed here. There were 31 total delivered. In terms of the Archer, there were 8 total delivered. It looks like the first one was destroyed or at least targeted yesterday. And then there have been 6 NASAMS batteries delivered to Ukraine with 6 launchers each. So far, it looks like 1 radar and 1 launcher have so far been targeted and possibly destroyed. Then turning to Avdiivka, the city in eastern Ukraine that Russia took control of on 17 February. Cities and towns have regularly changed hands in this war. That's nothing new, but we are seeing something notable around Avdiivka. Typically, after a city or a town falls, the lines shift to the outskirts of the town where they then restabilize. Russia, in this case, would reset after their offensive operations, and Ukraine has some time then to reestablish a defensive position a few kilometers outside of town. But that is not what we're seeing take place in Avdiivka. Instead, after this city fell, it looks like Russia's continued to make pretty steady progress for another 3 to 5 kilometers beyond the western edge of Avdiivka. So there's a couple different ways you can look at this. One is that Ukraine's next line of prepared defenses is further back, and they'll plan to use some of these water systems to canalize Russian movement into set kill zones. In that case, you could expect pretty significant fighting to kick back up here in a few days as Russia approaches a few of these towns further along the Duma River. Another possibility is that the secondary zone of fortifications isn't nearly as well constructed, and Russia might be able to continue progress at this pace for quite a while. And then the last thing that I think is worth throwing out here is the possibility that Ukraine is lacking the manpower and firepower to stop the Russian advance. Now, this one's going out on a limb, and I don't have any evidence to support this per se, but I think it's worth bringing up because this has been one of Russia's arguments that they've made around this war for a long time, kind of the attritional nature of this war, that over time, the Russian way of war will eventually grind down to the Ukrainian military to where they can no longer resist these Russian advances. So if that model were to work, it would likely play out in a manner where Russia is able to conduct a slow, steady advance further and further into Ukraine. Now, of course, this battle is still very much ongoing, so settling on any one way or another that this is going to wrap up would be pure speculation at this point, so we'll need to wait and see how this whole situation plays out. And then we've got some information from a Ukrainian soldier at the front in the south talking about the changing Russian tactics. He said assaults of varying intensity began in different areas. They accumulate infantry in landings, sending small groups, mostly at night. He said they go. They are fired upon. Some are dying. Others are coming. They die, but they cling on. They continue to send groups, accumulate infantry, and try to advance again. And so again and again. Obviously, they expect that the shortage of artillery will lead to the fact that small groups will be fired at selectively. They press in places where, for obvious reasons, the conditions for logistics and rotation are bad. So a couple things here. First, the concept of human wave type assaults has been controversial in this war, and I think there's a misunderstanding as to how that's being presented. It is not and never has been in this war what you would see in World War I, with hundreds or even thousands of troops standing up across the front, charging across open terrain, hoping to overwhelm enemy forces. That is not playing out in Ukraine. I don't think it has ever at this point. Instead, what we're seeing are groups of infantry between squad and platoon-sized elements, sometimes as few as 10, sometimes as many as 50, moving across open terrain, getting to a forward staging location, sometimes by armored vehicles, other times by unarmored transport trucks. They're dropped off, they're pressed forward, some of them die, some of them make it to the next rally point, if you will, and then the next group is brought up. And once there are 10, 20, 30, 50 or so Russian soldiers at that forwardmost rally point, they then press on forward from there. The reason this is being referred to as human wave or meat assault is that they are essentially sacrificing dozens of soldiers at a time to get a small number forward. It doesn't appear that in a lot of these cases, Russia is using suppressive fire. They're using their aircraft. They're not necessarily using mortar and artillery or even smoke to obscure the movement of some of their forces to the front. It's just a matter of, as this Ukrainian soldier says, they're not going to be able to target everybody. So they kill as many Russians as they can, but at the end of the day, a handful make it forward, and over time, there are enough in that forward position to continue their assault. Another notable piece here is that Ukraine is recognizing that the areas of their lines that are being targeted are those that are weakest, those that are running out of ammunition, where the logistics has been bad and the rotation of troops in and out of the frontline positions has not been as effective as it has been elsewhere. That is something that Russia likely has been watching for months, maybe even years at this point, to identify the weak points in the line. It's not always where the minefield is smaller or where there's less artillery systems, but where along the line is Ukraine having the hardest time rotating troops in and out or supplying ammunition, resupplying ammunition as this fight continues. In any war, this one is no different. Both sides are constantly gathering intelligence around all sorts of aspects like that. And what it sounds like, according to this Ukrainian soldier, is that Russian forces are attacking in the areas where they're identifying logistical shortages, especially tied to ammunition consumption. Then we got some interesting news from French President Emmanuel Macron yesterday, who said, quote, "We are convinced that the defeat of Russia is indispensable to security and the stability in Europe." He said there's no consensus today to send in an official endorsed manner troops on the ground. But in terms of dynamics, nothing can be ruled out. This is about the most aggressive language we've heard so far of any NATO country talking about putting boots on the ground in Ukraine. And just as a reference, in the United States, whenever that's asked in a poll, the numbers I have seen are never above 25% of Americans supporting U.S. troops on the ground in Ukraine. Obviously, Macron's statements here caused quite a stir. He added that we will do everything we must so that Russia does not win. However, the Secretary General of NATO, Stoltenberg, kind of shot this down a little bit, saying, quote, "NATO allies are providing unprecedented assistance to Ukraine. We have done that since 2014 and stepped up after the full-scale invasion. But there are no plans for NATO combat troops on the ground in Ukraine." So while it was notable that Macron brought this up and that it was presented in a public forum at all, it sounds like more and more as leaks are coming out of that meeting and from other governments around the world, that might have been raised in a conversation, but there doesn't appear to be any level of significant support for putting U.S. or NATO troops on the ground in Ukraine. Now, a couple days ago, a pretty graphic video emerged showing Russian forces executing a group of Ukrainian prisoners after they had surrendered. In the video, which I am not going to be showing here, the prisoners are lying on the ground for some time while a drone watches overhead. Eventually, a Russian soldier walks up and opens fire, followed by a few more of his fellow soldiers to his left and right. Presumably, this action kills all of the unarmed Ukrainian soldiers who had already given themselves up. Now, in posting this video, the Russian Rusich group congratulated them, saying, "Well done." Now, the Rusich group is a far-right neo-Nazi paramilitary unit that's been fighting alongside Russia since 2014. Now, this is not one of those cases where the term Nazi is just thrown around loosely. The founder of that organization, Alexei Melchikov, in an interview in 2020, said, quote, "I'm not going to go deep and say that I'm a nationalist, a patriot, an imperialist, and so forth. I'll say it outright. I'm a Nazi." So you just take his word for it. That's what he calls himself, the founder of this organization. Then after posting that congratulatory message to the Russian soldiers that executed the Ukrainians, they kind of doubled down in a following post on Telegram where they said, "After our post about the execution of prisoners, several of our friends from the various law enforcement and administrative structures contacted us. At first, they gently asked to remove the post with the execution, since according to them, the very fact of such an action, allegedly our military personnel did it, is completely refuted." So just a little bit of an insight there. It sounds like inside of Russia, the claims that these Russian soldiers caught on film executing Ukrainian soldiers was not them, that it was staged or made up or who knows. But it's an interesting dynamic here because the official Russian statement from that is that it's made up, not an actual event. But then you have these far-right groups, these neo-Nazi groups like the Rusich group saying it's real, we applaud it, we want it to happen more. But that's all I got for now. Of course, if interested in this or other national security subjects, be sure to check out the Substack linked in the description below. Yesterday, I talked a little bit about what Substack actually is, because I don't think a lot of people know that. It's essentially the combination of a website and a newsletter. So it's where we publish our written articles. The team publishes their written articles. We have things talking about the Iranian strategy in the Middle East, the narco-trafficking in Ecuador, the ongoing civil war with 3D printed weapons in Myanmar, and a whole lot more. The idea there, it's a mix, written as well as audio versions of some of those articles, is to provide complementary content to the things that I'm talking about in these videos. There's free options there. The majority of the articles, the majority of the stuff on Substack is free to everybody. Of course, we'd love it if you check it out, and that link is in the description below. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.